This is the MyExcelOnline podcast, episode number 16.
When someone tries Power Pivot out and starts seeing what it can do for them in their business, it's like they're the first person to discover fire. And this person's like, oh, didn't you see that? Like, wow, like the world just changed.
Welcome to the MyExcelOnline podcast, the need-to-know Excel insights, knowledge, and tips brought to you by the experts that know them best. Are you ready to explore your full potential and get better at Excel? It's time to stand out from the crowd with your host, John MICHALOUDIS.
G'day guys, and welcome to the MyExcelOnline podcast with your host, John MICHALOUDIS. In today's episode, we have an Excel MVP who is an expert in Power Pivot. One of the founding engineers behind Power Pivot during his 14-year career at Microsoft, he is one of the foremost authorities on self-service, business intelligence, and next-generation spreadsheet technology. He left Microsoft in 2010 to start his consulting and analytics company called PowerPivotPro.com, where he blogs and teaches about the empowering nature of Power Pivot and Power BI. He is the author of 2 books, including the world's #1 selling Power BI book called Power Pivot and Power BI, the Excel User's Guide, and has penned over 600 articles and white papers. Let's welcome from Indianapolis, USA, Mr. Rob Collie. Rob, how are you, buddy? Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you very much. That's probably the best intro I've ever had. In terms of word count alone, that was a heck of an intro. Much appreciated.
Well, I had to cut it down from 2,000 words to about 200. So, yeah, I'm good at copywriting.
Did you use a word count formula in Excel for that, or did you just cheat and use Word?
I cheat and use Word. Yeah.
There you go.
I didn't know there was a word count formula in Excel.
Well, I figured that you would have, you're just good at that, right? Like we probably just would count like the spaces. There is not a word count function. You're right, but I'm sure we could find 15 different ways to write that formula.
Probably using VBA, which I'm not good at. So good stuff, buddy. Now, I've told our listeners a little bit about your background. Now, why don't you expand more and tell our listeners how you got to become an Excel expert and a Power Pivot expert?
Well, it's kind of funny. Like most people who get good at Excel, I didn't set out to be that. Really Excel people who quote unquote Excel people, they all kind of fall into it. And even though I worked at Microsoft, I did not gravitate to Excel naturally. Like I remember at one point, like in the late 1990s, we had finished up a release of Office, which is where I worked, and someone was asking me where I wanted to go work next, and I said, I gave him a long speech, but one of the things I said was like, for instance, I could never go work on something like Excel, right? And I just said it like in this like really dismissive way, like there's just no way I would ever go work on something like that, right? I had no idea what Excel was like, really. And I sort of like accidentally got assigned to the Excel team at some point. Like I did not choose to go work on the Excel team. But it's funny, like you fall into things and then you decide, I kind of like this. This suits me, And that's exactly what happened. Like it was really honestly fantasy football that we were playing at Microsoft in the late 90s before it was even a big thing on the web. Like we were scoring it using Excel. And I discovered that Excel was a way that I could gain an advantage over my coworkers, who weren't really Excel people. And that's really what started it for me. Like the first pivot table I ever built, like I worked on the Excel team for a year before I even knew what pivot tables did. Okay. Mm-hmm. And the first pivot table I ever built was to roll up the skill levels of a couple of different fantasy football leagues that I was assembling, right? To sort of match make, and keep the competitive balance, right? And I'm like, oh, that's probably what pivot tables are good for, and it was right. And believe it or not, that's the beginning. Like that's where the addiction started.
Nice one. And then you went into Power Pivot, right?
Well, also completely by accident. So I stayed on Excel for actually, quite a while, considering how quickly people move around at Microsoft. I was a veteran by the time I was done. So on the 2007 release of Excel, I led the team that did sort of the business intelligence focused features, like the pivot table overhaul, cube formulas, which probably no one's heard of, but it's really cool, and the table feature that was on my team as well. But these were all people reporting to me doing those features. I had an awesome team. I was just kind of like the mascot. And about that time, as we were finishing that up, there was an actual fantasy football software team at Microsoft that was building a fantasy football website, and they came and knocked on my door, and I said, "Yeah, I gotta go."
Yeah.
And so I went and joined that team, and after about 6 months, that team was deemed, that whole project was deemed silly by management, and they canceled it. And here I was now stuck in the other side of the company, and I got folded into Bing, the search engine, and I spent about a year there. Did not like it, and I was looking for a new job. And at that time, while I was looking for a new job, Amir Netz, the distinguished engineer in charge of what was called Project Gemini, dropped me an email. Like I was looking at the career website at Microsoft, and he drops me this email and says, "Hey, you want to come look at what we're doing over here?" And I went over there. I'm like, "Oh my gosh, you're building like Turbo Excel." Yeah. I'm in. So yeah, Project Gemini is what became PowerPivot, and like I was one of the first few like full-time engineers working on that.
And how was that, working on that and getting, starting that from scratch into what it is now?
Hugely surprising. You have this as a Microsoft engineer, there's this cycle of emotions that you go through on every single product. At the beginning, you get really excited, like, yeah, this new thing we're going to do is going to change the world. Like, I'm sure the engineers that were building Clippy, the Clippy office assistant, were in the beginning of phases of that project. I'm positive that they were like, this is it. We're launching the dawn of intelligent assisted software. I promise you that's how they felt.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the reality that you end up with is incredibly disappointing, And I think Clippy's probably the best example of crashed expectations. But like seriously, like when we were working on the table feature, we weren't thinking of it as the table feature. We were thinking of it as the beginning of structured reference. Like we're really going to make spreadsheets work the way that they always kind of should have. It's just incredibly ambitious. And then it becomes, a useful thing, but nothing game changing. And when I left Microsoft in 2010, PowerPivot wasn't even quite done yet. And I left for family reasons that we could fill an entire podcast with, but it wouldn't be relevant. Yeah. So we'll stay away from that. Yeah. And I left for family reasons and found myself in a corner of the country where there wasn't any software development going on. I was in Cleveland, Ohio, and I decided to just try PowerPivot sort of as the way to establish my personal brand outside of Microsoft. And what I discovered was that for the first time ever, something that I'd worked on, the original ambitious expectations that we had were actually justified. And in fact, I found something different, which is that it was way better than any of us had ever dared hope it would be. Again, I just started blogging about PowerPivot as a way to get my name out there, and fully expected it to fail, not be very good. But like, I remember this lightning bolt moment where I'm like, oh my gosh, the world is going to change. And this was me working with it as a user at that point from the outside. And that happened in like late 2009, early 2010. And every dollar I've made as a professional since early 2010. So I'm like 7 years in now. My entire profession has been 100% PowerPivot.
Wow. And dollar made and also dollars saved for your clients, right?
Oh my gosh, yes. We have single workbooks that we have built with our clients that save, a particular client saves over $25 million a year from a single PowerPivot workbook.
And how is that?
It's that workbook, in a way, it's like the scorecard for the entire company. Mm-hmm. It tells them how they're doing. The CEO of this multi-billion dollar, international organization, the CEO has access to this PowerPivot scorecard, which is an Excel scorecard. It's rendered in Excel with PowerPivot behind it, and they can view that in their web browser using Excel Online. But it's sliceable and drillable. You can go down like to regional managers and area vice presidents and get all the way down to even to like individual offices within particular cities. It scores them all in terms of customer satisfaction, which is really the only thing that's important to their business. That's what determines their bottom line is customers in, and you want to make that positive experience so customers come in and stay, and reduce attrition, dissatisfaction. Yeah. So customers leave, and so their customer, intake funnel has become a lot more efficient, and their, customer leakage, attrition has become, much more reduced, simply because everyone knows where they stand at all times.
Yeah, wow.
And this is the kind of thing that typically you hear people say, you could never use Excel for that, right? Like, you need an enterprise business intelligence solution that costs millions of dollars and takes years to implement. And we did it in 2 weeks.
Wow. Jeez, man. Power Pivot is amazing. I'm just, scratching the surface of what's possible, and you can do so much. And as you said, 25 million, that's one company. Imagine how much you can save for all these other companies out there and that are using these enterprise solutions, which are just rubbish.
Yeah. The guy that I worked with at that company, he went to his IT team and said, we need this project. And they said, hey, fantastic. We can get started in a year and a half. Not even exaggerating.
Yeah.
We can get started in a year and a half. And we were done in 2 weeks.
Geez.
And that thing's now run for almost 4 years, that workbook. So at $25 million a year, that's a $100 million workbook.
Exactly.
That, we didn't charge them. We really need to figure out how to charge a percentage of money saved.
Yeah. Percentage of money saved. 1% of money saved. There you go.
Which then we'd probably hear a different story. Yeah, that workbook is saving us maybe like $100,000 a year.
Yeah. Nice one. So now you're at powerpivotpro.com, and I remember when you started, as you said, it was just yourself.
Yes.
But now you have like a team of 10 people. I see all these faces on the website. It's grown into a company, hasn't it?
Yeah, we're lagging behind on updating our team page. Here's the way it feels, is that when someone tries Power Pivot out and starts seeing what it can do for them in their business, it's like they're the first person to discover fire. And they look around, at their colleagues and coworkers in the office, and like everyone's still looking at them like nothing's changed, And this person's like, oh, didn't you see that? Like, wow, like the world just changed right there. And everyone's like, nah, we don't really get it, And so those people, that's sort of like what our whole company is staffed by now. That's who our employees are those people who've seen this, and they can't go back. They can't go back to the old way. And so, like, some people, when they catch fire with Power Pivot, their organization, their company, they recognize it and they get it, and they're like, wow, we really need to be kind of going all in on this. And those people have incredible increases in their job satisfaction as a result. If you see it and your organization doesn't see it, it's like really dissatisfying, right? You've got to go find some other place, We're collecting people like that. And the demand for our services is truly exploding because, again, even if in terms of like percentage of the world, and Power Pivot awareness is still really, really, really low. Yeah. Even knowing that it exists, much less knowing how to use it, right? But even though the percentage is really low, the absolute number of companies is large. And then Microsoft's also been doing, if you maybe heard about Power BI, this is what's really cool, even cooler in some ways, is that they are making a big, big, big noise, Microsoft marketing, about Power BI. And here's the amazing secret for the Excel audience. It's still just Power Pivot. It's the same thing, right? It's the same formula language. If you learn Power Pivot, you are learning Power BI at the same time and don't even know it. And so the awareness of Power BI is causing a big spike in demand for our consulting and training services.
Wow. And what other services do you provide? Training and online training seminars? So
we have an interesting, almost like personality crisis at our company, right? On one hand, like as a company, we ask ourselves, hey, are we a business to consumer, type of company, or are we a business to business type of company? So clearly the example where we did the $25 million workbook, that's us doing, rapid consulting work for a big company. But then there's also like, our relationship with individuals that are trying to revolutionize their careers. We're really passionate about that. And so our blog, like we're one of the few like consulting companies in the world whose homepage is just the blog. We allow the blog to be front and center. Mm-hmm. So for individuals and also for teams, but for individuals, we have an online video university, that's sort of, self-paced, incredibly comprehensive. And we've had thousands of people go through that over the years. And in fact, some of the people who are coming back and getting hired by us now are people who originally took that video university.
Nice.
Like, so like the seeds were sown, like in 2013 when we started that course. And so that's one thing that we definitely still run, and people seem to love it. We also do here in the U.S. we do a series of public training seminars where we go to a particular city, and anyone can enroll and as a student in that 2 to 3 day class. But our business is like every day we're picking up new clients that we're helping them adopt. The core of our business is helping organizations adopt this stuff. So there's always a fine line between training and consulting. And one of the jokes we say is that if a company asks us for consulting, they say, we want you to build something for us. Like, we teach them. We build it for them, but we also teach them how to improve it and modify it. So they don't really need to lean on us, except for brand new stuff that they've never done before. We help get, we can help them get over that hump. But like, they can continue to modify. Like that workbook, the $100 million workbook, has continued to evolve. The client knows how to modify it. And then so if they ask for consulting, we give them training, right? If they ask for training, the best training is also consulting in some sense, because if we use your data and your business problems as the sort of the environment, the test bed for teaching, it becomes a lot more impactful, and you retain it a lot better. Yeah, that's probably a much longer answer than what you were expecting.
Yeah, no, it's nice. I like it. Very clear, and our listeners will appreciate it. I've seen your blog posts, and I love them. Put a lot of effort into it, and a lot of design, and a lot of artwork, and just to make it clear as well. And your knack of writing is just funny. So for people out there who want to go onto the blog, go to powerpivotpro.com and just go to a few articles that Rob's written. They're really, really great. They're really great. Yeah, and you're writing from another world, mate. So really good stuff. All right, now let's go on to the next part, which is your expertise, obviously Power Pivot. Now, for our listeners out there, who are beginners and intermediates and haven't seen Power Pivot, tell them, what is Power Pivot for those people who haven't seen it or used it before?
I think the easiest way to understand Power Pivot is in terms of the benefits that it provides you. Now, first of all, it's from Microsoft. Okay, so like if you're telling other people about it, make sure to emphasize it's from Microsoft. This is not something that my company has built. I helped build this when I was at Microsoft. So it is, very trustworthy. It's from the trusted source, Microsoft itself. Secondly, it is an extension to Excel. So Power Pivot is not some brand new application. You don't launch it from the start menu as a separate app. You launch Excel, and then you can activate Power Pivot from within Excel. You should really think of it as a second engine, a second brain hiding under the hood in Excel that is primarily a calculation engine, but also a data storage engine. So that's sort of the what it is. But the benefits, again, I think the benefits are the key.
Go for it.
The first one is that the one that sort of gets people's attention pretty quickly is so much of our work in Excel is taking multiple tables of data. There's a table that comes from this system over here and another table that gets emailed to me. And all of those tables ultimately need to kind of like come together and play a symphony together in order to give me some sort of meaningful result. And, one of the places where people who are learning Excel tend to like hit the steepest wall is when they start trying to learn things like VLOOKUP, to sort of turn all those tables into one big Franken table. And Power Pivot makes that super, super, super easy. You just literally can drag drop between columns across tables and say, hey, these two columns match. And Power Pivot goes, okay, got it. Those two tables can now work together without any additional work. So it's kind of nice, like whether you're a novice or scared of VLOOKUP, like it's actually easier to learn relationships than it is, which is what the Power Pivot drag drop thing is. It's easier to learn relationships than it is to learn VLOOKUP. But even if you're a pro, you're a shark, you've been using VLOOKUP forever, and there's always people who are like, I don't even use VLOOKUP anymore. I'm an index match ninja. Even for those people, this is still way better because it's a heck of a lot less tedious, and it also doesn't make your workbook run slow. The workbook is still super fast. And that brings me to the second benefit, which is you can cram a lot of data into Power Pivot. one of the reasons why we see people using Access all the time is because, well, we have more than 1 million rows of data and it won't fit on a worksheet. I have a single workbook that I carry around on my flimsy little laptop that has 300 million rows of data in a workbook.
Wow.
And it's in multiple tables that are linked together, and the whole thing recalculates in less than a second.
Wow.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Jeez.
But even if you don't have 300 million rows, like I use Power Pivot to calculate and to analyze even a single table of 50 rows of data. I will use Power Pivot because it is just better. And that brings me to the third benefit, which is something I call portable formulas. And it's a bit of an abstract concept, but once you see it in practice, you're like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. Like in Excel, when you go build some sort of sophisticated analysis or something, and then someone says to you, oh, that's great, but I'd like to see it broken out a little bit differently. The Excel person's heart sinks because they have to go and rebuild the whole thing basically with that new assumption in mind. In Power Pivot, all of the formulas that you write, you write the formula one time, right? So if you have like a percentage of total formula or a change versus last month formula or even like a year to date formula, you write that formula literally once in the whole workbook. There's not even copying and pasting it across cells. And when someone asks you to change the look of things or change the question, you just check a single checkbox in your Power Pivot field list, and everything just automatically re-updates. The formula just automatically adjusts to the new question, and you're done.
That's amazing, man.
We even tell people that at that moment, when they check that checkbox and they get the new result, that they should enforce a 30-minute waiting period before they go back and show the results to the person who was asking. Because if you just show the checkbox, it cheapens what you did. It'll make them think, it'll make those other people think that all you did was check a checkbox. But no, you earned that checkbox by being smart in advance. And then the final big benefit that I like to emphasize to people is auto refresh. You're just grabbing the latest data and pushing it through a workbook to produce some sort of charts and reports. Even if the workbook is done, you just need to grab the latest data and do that. Is very often a labor-intensive process. With Power Pivot, refresh, the whole thing is a one-click. Even with data transformation, like if you needed to make changes to the data and sort of format it differently, on the way in, that's where Power Query comes in. And those two tools play amazingly well together. So single-click automatic refresh, and then even better, you can get to zero-click automatic refresh because you can schedule your workbooks to refresh themselves and distribute themselves, the latest versions, to your colleagues. So, you could actually go on vacation and not have to log in from the beach or whatever to make the latest data for your buddies.
Well, that's great because I get the number one question that I get from when I do my pivot table webinars is, how do you auto refresh? And that always comes up. How do you, automatically refresh? And, there's a couple of ways that you can do it, but auto refresh is popular. And also how to consolidate or how to merge tables. And you just covered that. But by using Power Pivot, man, that's amazing stuff. That is great. Awesome benefits there. Now, in the show notes, I'm going to put in there how to install Power Pivot. So you don't need to explain to that. In the show notes, people can go there and I've got a tutorial of how to install Power Pivot. Now, quickly, pivot table versus Power Pivot.
Well, the beautiful thing is that Power Pivot, when you're using Power Pivot, you're still using like the thing that you're seeing in the Excel grid, like your final results, is still just an Excel pivot table. So, everything about pivot tables is still completely valuable. Like Power Pivot itself doesn't introduce some sort of new like display type, like, your pivot tables and pivot charts in Excel. That is the way that you see the data and the calculations that are being built in Power Pivot. So sort of like the final user interface for it is still just Excel sheets. There's really no reason, once you've sort of tried out Power Pivot, there's no reason you're not choosing between pivot tables and Power Pivot. It's more like, which kind of pivot tables do you want to make? Do you want to make pivot tables that are powered by the traditional under the hood pivot table engine, which is what we've been using for years? Or do you want to use the pivot tables that have the big monster Power Pivot calculation engine behind it? And so for me, I don't make quote unquote regular pivot tables anymore. All of my pivot tables always have the Power Pivot engine behind them because I always want to take advantage of, even if it's a small data set, I always want to be able to take advantage of that portable formulas thing. I always want to be able to take advantage of the auto refresh thing, even for the simplest stuff. So it's not really an either or, which is really nice. Really, really, really nice.
Now, there's a couple of features here that I want to talk about. And if you could just quickly explain to our listeners. Number one, measures. What are they? They've changed the names. It was calculated field, then it was measures.
Yeah, they've been changing it. Yeah. Measures is what they've settled on, which I like.
Good.
Measure is just a formula for a pivot table. So one of the things people are always asking us for when I worked on the Excel team was, I want to go to my pivot table and write a formula next to it in the grid and have that formula like fill down and adjust as the pivot table changes size and shape. Okay. And at its heart, that's what a measure is. It's exactly that feature. You don't type it into the grid. You type it into a separate formula bar. And for those of the handful of people in the world who have been using traditional pivot tables, there was a feature in there called calculated fields, which is similar to what Power Pivot offers you. By comparison, many, many, many years of an entire team at Microsoft building the measures feature, whereas the calculated fields feature was kind of like a tiny little thing that was put in years ago and never improved. So for instance, like there's a distinct count function in Power Pivot's formula language that allows pivot tables to give you a distinct count, a unique count, that doesn't count duplicates, for instance. And this is one of the funny ways that people discover Power Pivot is they're Googling or whatever. They're searching for, how do I get a unique count or a distinct count in a pivot table? And they're like, whoa, what's this Power Pivot thing? The measures language, the formula language for measures is 100% made to look just like Excel. So it has a sum function that works like the Excel sum function. It has an if function that works just like the Excel if function. Then it has a collection of these new magic functions like distinct count, for instance. And once you've encountered this one function called calculate, which is like the magic do anything I want formula function, I guarantee you that will be your new favorite Excel function. It'll be your favorite function ever. It'll replace whatever your current favorite is. Calculate is your new favorite.
Mine is some product.
Well, I'm gonna go calculate over some product any day of the week, man. Any day. Yeah. But I understand why some product is awesome. But calculate, yeah. And you can do crazy things like a formula, like I said, that always gives you the year-to-date value. And if you like listed months down the side of your pivot table on rows, each one of those months will give you the year-to-date total for that, that was true during that month. And then you want to filter it, you can filter it. The formula just keeps working. It's really cool.
Wow, that's just super, super amazing, man. Wow. What else can calculate do? One more thing.
What else can calculate do? One of the things that I've done a lot of before Power Pivot was I would often like create multiple pivot tables on the same worksheet that all looked exactly the same. They had the same structure. It's just that I would set a report filter to a different value on each pivot table. So one pivot table would show me like the results for region 1 and another pivot table would show the results for region 2, but otherwise they'd look exactly the same. And then I would like write formulas that reached into those pivot tables to sort of do comparisons, right? Like, so like region 1 versus region 2, the percentage of total or whatever. And then you end up creating this other report, maybe on another worksheet, that hides all of those pivot tables as data sources. Well, now you can have a single pivot table that's sort of like filtered in lots of different ways at the same time. So you can have a single field that's saying, this is my region 1 sales, this is region 2 sales, or like this is my bicycles only sales. You have complete control on a granular, almost like cell by cell basis, if you want, within the pivot table over what the filtering is. With the report filter feature of pivots, you change that filter, it changes everything. You can sort of get individual columns filtered by different things. And you don't even have to display, like, for example, like the region field. You wouldn't have to have region on your pivot, like on rows or columns or anything like that. You could just have like region 1 sales displayed right next to total sales.
Wow, man. And why hasn't anyone told us about this?
That's the thing that's been frustrating me the most. It's sort of like, so the Power Pivot feature was built by like the SQL Server organization, but it was built for the Excel audience. Okay. That was my job, was to make it, appealing to the Excel folks. when I was working on it. But it was built by the SQL team. The Excel team didn't really understand it in the early years. Like in 2010 is when it was first released. We're coming up on the 7th anniversary of the release of Power Pivot, and we still haven't heard about it, right? Really frustrating. So the Excel team didn't really understand it at first. And the SQL team, even though they knew that they needed to build it for the Excel audience, they didn't really understand how to talk to the Excel audience. So all the efforts to sell Power Pivot were driven by the SQL team, and they were aimed at the business intelligence audience, which is an audience that looks at Excel and goes, why are you giving us Excel? It was a real mismatch the way that they tried to sell it, in my opinion. We have not had, to this day, any sort of concerted effort from Microsoft to advertise the existence of Power Pivot to the people who need it. It has just fallen through the cracks. And I'm optimistic because the Excel team, they completely get it now, completely. They're huge fans. They realize, wow, this is the coolest thing that anyone's ever given us. Like the SQL team just gave it to them, right? And so, they're really getting organized now and figuring out how they're going to, get the proper value out of that and to, get the word out. So, stay tuned on that. Fingers crossed that something excellent will happen. I keep checking in on that story, but yeah, nothing yet.
All right, good stuff, man. That sounds like it's very powerful. So yeah, thanks for letting us know the possibilities with those measures. Now, next one, DAX formulas. What are they for the people out there that it's the first time they're hearing it? DAX, the name, DAX. What does it stand for?
DAX is a scary name, right? Like it sounds hard.
Yeah.
It stands for Data Analysis Expressions.
Shouldn't it be day?
Yeah. The way to think of it is it's Excel plus. Like, for example, the if function that works just like the Excel if function is a DAX function. So if you write an if formula in Power Pivot, you've written DAX. You get to go to your LinkedIn and update your LinkedIn to say DAX programmer. And if you got paid to do it, you're now a professional DAX programmer. Okay? Yeah. That's a joke, but it's also the truth. Like you can and should do that. DAX. The DAX formula language was built to be an extension to the Excel formula language. And you can't use it in the Excel grid. You can only use it in the Power Pivot calculation environment. But again, that lives inside Excel. And the results of it get displayed in Excel. So it is absolutely an easy transition. You're writing sum functions, you're writing if functions. You're like, whoa, I'm a DAX programmer, right? I'm a DAX formula specialist. But then you get to, ooh, what's this calculate function do? Ooh, just like the way that everyone learns Excel, you learn it incrementally.
Yeah.
DAX is something that, I'm always getting a little bit better at DAX, just like everyone's always getting a little bit better at Excel.
So DAX is, as you said, an extension of the Excel formulas and only available within Power Pivot via the measures and also via the columns area in the...
Yep, there's calculated columns, just like you would expect.
All right. So how many DAX formulas are there?
Oh, gosh, there's a couple hundred.
Yeah.
Like even just the functions that are used for navigating time, like the year-to-date version, the change versus last year version. There's a few dozen of just the calendar navigation type stuff, calendar running totals and trending and things like that. I don't actually know off the top of my head, but I think I would say at least 200.
Nice one.
There are many of them that I still, after 7 years as a professional, have never used them. So you don't need to know all of them. Like if there's like 10 of them that if you know those 10, you can move mountains.
Yeah. You're a consultant.
Yes, exactly.
Good stuff. Man, yeah, a lot of information, great information there. Thank you for that. And I know that our listeners have, at least now, starting to understand what Power Pivot is, when they should use it, and the possibilities. So that's great. Now, who should actually use Power Pivot? Should it be the finance analyst, the sales analyst, the admin person?
Finance for sure. In general, anyone that finds themselves building, let's say, pivot tables for other people, or even for themselves, but like certainly if you're building them for other people to inform them, Power Pivot should be in your tool set eventually. You don't have to go stampeding into it all at once, but your future lies there for sure.
And you can be a beginner. It's not that hard to learn. So, wow. All right. Now, what's the weirdest thing that you've seen done with Power Pivot?
I did a Pokemon team evaluator. There's a blog post. If you search Pokemon on our website, you'll find I wrote a simulator that will determine the optimal 3-person, 3 Pokemon team I think that's probably although the funniest things are client stories that I'm not allowed to tell. There's been some really funny things we've found with Power Pivot. We've caught people stealing.
Okay.
Cool. It's like the eye of Sauron. Nothing hides from Power Pivot.
You should implement Power Pivot in the IRS.
Yes. Yeah. Although maybe not. We'll keep it from them.
They don't need to know that we're stealing. All right. Now, what do you see Power Pivot in 10 years' time?
I see it as basically like a formula language that's even being taught like in business schools, and it's sort of indistinguishable from the rest of Excel. Like it's just like the way that, it's like a slightly more structured, turbocharged version of Excel, and we hardly even notice the difference between regular Excel and Power Pivot. I think that's the destiny.
Wow. Taught in business schools. Wow. Is that happening at the moment?
Some places it is, yeah.
Yeah. I think Excel should be taught in high school.
I agree.
Okay, let's take a short break and we'll be back with Rob's online course and his favorite Excel tips.
Can you analyze this spreadsheet using Excel pivot tables?
Sure, if you can show me how to.
Introducing the Extreme Pivot Table online course, which teaches you how to analyze business data and highlight key metrics so that you can make insightful business decisions, create interactive analytical dashboards that will reach top management, and set you apart from your peers, which will make you more important and increase your chances of a promotion or pay rise. Developed over 15 years through extensive professional use and including real business case studies, it is the ultimate pivot table course. With over 200 short downloadable video tutorials accessible online anywhere 24/7, 12-month personal support if you ever get stuck, and a 30-day money-back guarantee. Visit MyExcelOnline.com today and give your professional development the boost it deserves.
All right, we are back here with Rob Collie from PowerPivotPro.com, and he has a course about Power Pivot. Now, Rob, can you tell us, why you decided to create this online course?
Well, there was a lot of reasons for it. So let's start with the book that I first wrote. I wrote the first book, my first book on Power Pivot, because I noticed that even other Excel MVPs were not taking to Power Pivot. They didn't even really almost know about it. And when they did try it, they didn't never get super deep into it. And this seemed like a real almost tragedy to me, because it's super Excel. It's like Excel, just way better, certain things anyway. And I wrote it almost the first book, almost as a love letter to the other Excel MVPs.
Come and join us.
Yeah. I think there are so many awesome Excel techniques that I see every day, from other Excel MVPs and Excel bloggers and celebrities, and I go, okay, that's amazing. How cool is that? If they added Power Pivot underneath that, they could add a completely another level of flexibility to it that would just blow me away and blow everyone else away, and even them. And so, but some people don't learn as well reading. Mm-hmm. Some people really like video. There's so many different learning styles, and I've been sort of getting more and more wisdom about this over time, that there's not everyone learns the same way. So the video course, when I set out to create it, was meant to be sort of the video alternative to the book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But then as I was making the videos, there's something about making videos, and I with all kinds of I really got into that. It took me 6 months to make this video course. And there's so many animations, custom animations that I made for it. And in the course of raising the quality bar to that level, I started. It felt like it was such forever. Building this thing was it was going to stand for a long time. And so, believe it or not, creating the video course forced me to even become better at Power Pivot. Creating it, I had to go back and sharpen some fundamentals and get clearer about it. Creating the video course was the last time that I really personally got better at Power Pivot. That pushed me forward. So it was really kind of cool in a number of ways.
Yeah, because it's like performing live. You got to show it within a matter of 5 minutes, and you got to know what
Yeah.
you're talking about. It's not like a book where you got to copy and paste and come back. But this is, you have your 5 minutes. You can edit it, I understand that, but you got to know what you're talking about. So you really got to know what you're talking about. So
Yes.
that's the power
Yes.
of online training. So cool stuff. And it took you 6 months to record. My pivot table course took 12 months.
Really? I believe it. If you're doing a good job of it, like, and I remember over and over again, I'd be like halfway through like creating and recording a module, and then an inspiration would strike me. I'd be like, oh, there's a much better way to explain this.
Yes.
And then I'd like put my head in my hands going, and I can't unsee that thought. I have to start over.
Exactly. And sometimes you record
Yeah.
a video 3 times or 4 times. And you're
Yeah.
like,
Yep.
but
Exactly.
you perfect it, once you get it done, it's there, it's there forever.
It is. And I'm disadvantaged. I don't have the awesome radio voice that you do. I would have to maybe hire you to be the voiceover for our
I don't
next
think
course.
I have well, sometimes I have a sexy voice. I can put it on. But I don't think I have a radio voice. Your voice is nice as well. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate that.
I don't know who has a radio voice. It's just, we just talk and teach. So we're not here to be disc jockeys. We're teaching Excel. So look, I've taken your course and it's great. And people out there should definitely have a look at it. It's a great course, and your teaching style is just is unique. And you get your point across very easily. So easy to understand. So it's a great course. Now, what can our listeners expect from this online course? What kind of modules do you have, and what do you go through for anyone that hasn't taken this course yet?
Advice I'd give to your listeners is that if you take our course, our video course, don't try to blaze through it. It is meant to be, sort of slowly chewed over the course of maybe even, 6 months or so, because it is, even if you read like the latest version of my book, the video course is more comprehensive than that.
Mm-hmm.
I think there are like, I don't want to scare people, but there's like 96 separate videos that average about 15 minutes each. You can digest a single video in a sitting. It's not, it's bite sized. There's just a lot of bites.
Yeah.
And by the time you get through like the first 25% of it, you're already a superhero, seriously, of data analysis. And then it's like, even in the book, there's like a chapter in our book that's just 1 page long that's called Intermission, that encourages you to just go put the book down and go conquer in the world for a while. Use those powers, and then come back and read the rest of the book, because like you do not have to be the expert at this to be amazing. Like when I was really bad at Power Pivot, I was already a superhero. It's a funny thing to say. I tell my students that your first goal in all of this is to suck. Just get to the point where you're bad at it and you're amazing. And then you start getting, over time, you get good. So yeah, it's incredibly comprehensive. That intimidates people sometimes, but you don't have to, just blaze through it.
No, look, you just need 2 modules and then bang, you're up and running. So, it's, an hour and a bit, so it's not too long. So, now which people are you targeting for this? There's Excel beginners, someone that hasn't started yet, intermediate users that have been using Excel for, a few years, or advanced users? Who's this course for?
I definitely built it with the sort of existing pivot table user in mind. And, I wouldn't say that you have to be an advanced pivot table user to start with Power Pivot, but it's not even really that pivot table knowledge is crucial. I think it's more of like a qualification test in terms of what interests you. Like I have this theory that it's kind of a silly theory, but there's some truth behind it, that there's essentially like a data gene that you either have it or you don't. And when you think about a pivot table, at least at its most fundamental, you're checking checkboxes in a list, and you're getting some subtotals and grand totals, and like it's not really fundamentally a complicated thing, But like it's scary. Most people who even people who use Excel are intimidated by it. So it's almost like it's an enthusiasm test. Like, have you been using pivot tables? Yes? Okay, then you're our people. You should definitely take a look at Power Pivot. But it's not like heavy duty pivot table knowledge is a hard prereq for getting started with Power Pivot or anything like that. It's more like, are you the right kind of person? Are you interested in this kind of stuff? But like for me, like whenever we're working with like a new client with our company, like I always ask them, like, let's go find the people in your organization that are using pivot tables and VLOOKUP, or the equivalent of VLOOKUP. There's always the index matchers, that are a bit more hardcore. For the record, I never graduated to index match, but we always look for those people. And I'll tell you what, if you're a pivot and VLOOKUP person, Power Pivot is the most amazing thing for you. And that's the target.
I'm sure there's plenty of people listening that are in that scenario, so you should check out this course. Now, quickly, the modules. What do you go through this course? What kind of features of Power Pivot do you show?
The fundamentals in the first chunk of the course, we introduce you to, what it's like to load data, and what, how to sort of do that. And then what really it focuses a lot around this concept of relationships that replace VLOOKUP and the equivalents of VLOOKUP, and how those work, and how those really aren't for those handful of people who are database savvy. And by the way, I'm not database savvy. I'm not a SQL guy. Everything's really down to earth, no jargon, kind of our rule. And so we explain relationships as really just being wires that transmit filters. Like a filter can be sent from one table to another. And we get into how the calculation engine works. There's a 6-step process for how these calculations work. And super, super, super simple. None of the steps are complicated at all, but we just really drill that into your head. So in the end of that first, let's say 25% of the class, you walk away from that with a knowledge of how you can have tables linked together to kind of play a symphony of data, and it's not difficult. And then when you start adding formulas to your pivot tables, these things called measures, which are just the most amazing formulas ever, how those get calculated behind the scenes, so that if ever one of them starts giving you a number you don't expect, you're able to quickly debug it and figure out what the issue is. That's even in our live classes when we teach in person, basically follow the same sort of curriculum in our live class. Those fundamentals are the thing that you really need to know. Once you know that, you can ignore all the rest of the advanced stuff for a long time if you want. That's where it starts. What are relationships? How do they actually work? Because, learning to think in multiple tables is not something it's not hard, but it's different for Excel people, because Excel is a one-table world. You want to build a chart? Get all the data into one table. We want to build a pivot, get it all into one table. And Power Pivot's almost like the opposite. It almost prefers separate tables. It's new muscle memory, it's new neural pathways, but they're not difficult. They're just new.
And the more advanced stuff that you teach at the end of the course, what does that cover?
Well, we get into cube formulas, which are awesome for building scorecards and dashboards. We do a really sort of short introduction to macros. And, if you've never been a macro user, we make that pretty easy. And we convey sort of here's the value in using macros with Power Pivot. If you are an existing macro user, you get some really good ideas for how you can use macros, again, in concert with Power Pivot. We also provide sort of a library of sample macros. There's just a lot of things about working with Power Pivot that gets you interested in different corners of the Excel macro language, like manipulating slicers, for instance, is not something that, it's not traditionally been a hotspot for macro development. So we provide some seeds in that regard. But then we really get deep into the calculation engine, the Power Pivot calculation engine in other ways, and sort of show you here's a way to triple your superpowers. Once you sort of established a comfort zone with the basics and you've kind of baked them into your brain really good, then we can sort of come along to you and say, and here's the atomic weapon that's been hiding in the shadows. We didn't want to tell you about it in the beginning. It's a little more complicated, but once you have that fundamentals, you can grasp this now. And all of a sudden, it's 10x on your existing superpowers. It's crazy. It's almost like this exponential or logarithmic scale, like the Richter scale or something like that. When you're a 3 on the Power Pivot scale, you're already 1,000 times as effective as you are with sort of traditional Excel analysis tools. But then when you go from 3 to 4 on the Power Pivot scale, now you're 10 times what you were before. I had this long curve where every 3 months I would look back at the things I'd done 3 months ago in Power Pivot and gone, oh man, I could do that so much better today. But the thing I did 3 months ago was insanely valuable. It was a world beater. So there's nothing wrong with it. It's just that every 3 months I'm wow, I'm just my powers are expanding. It was a really interesting, for me it was about a year and a half of that, of every 3 months going, yep, I'm a lot better. But I was awesome back then.
Yeah.
I finally reached the point where I think I'm not sure that I'm ever going to get any better than I am now.
Until they bring something else.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot of powerful stuff. And I'm positive that a lot of your students have just taken this course and gone on to bigger and better things in the corporate world. Do you have any testimonials or any scenarios like that of your students taking this course and then just, getting a pay rise or getting a promotion?
Well, over and over and over again, our students or our clients, the people that we help one way or another. And again, there's lots of different ways for us to teach you this stuff, the book, the video, on-site training, we do public classes. Again, it's sort of like everyone has a different way that they prefer to learn. But over and over and over again, we get unsolicited testimonials from former clients and students, and they'll email us and they'll tell us their story. Every single time, they're the same 3 words: changed my life. That's what they say. I don't send out a survey saying, hey, has this stuff changed your life? Check here for true, check here for false. I don't ask any questions. This is completely voluntary. And over and over again, we could do this, like the if this equals that. We could do a string compare test here. Every single time the words changed my life come up. Not changed my career, which would be awesome. Okay? My life. That's how much better. And yeah, people do. They change jobs. They make a lot more money. It's amazing. Like, this is the thing that's really, the whole team of us, like, that's what really gets us up every day, gets us, pumped every single day, is the life change and the happiness. Like, the first slide that I put up on the screen when I do a public class has a big, smiley face, cartoon smiley face on it. And the title of the slide is Intro to Happy.
Nice.
We're there to talk about formulas and all kinds of other quote unquote boring stuff.
Yeah.
But I'm talking about life change and happy, and it's the truth. Isn't that crazy? Software never does. Software never does that.
No. But this just definitely does that. This is just on another world, man. Power Pivot is just another thing. And hey, tell our listeners, they're wanting to get in this course. How do they get in there? What's the best way to take your online course?
Well, we have, obviously our website, powerpivotpro.com. It's on our menus on the website under the How We Can Help menu item. But I think we're also going to put a couple of links, like in the description of the podcast on your site. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we'll put the links in there.
Yep. And we have a discount code for your listeners.
Oh, nice. Thank you.
It's 4 letters. I think it has to be capitals. I'm not really sure if it's case sensitive, but it's all caps. MyExcel, MyExcel, right? In honor of MyExcel Online.
All right.
And actually that will be good for 20% off of the video course. You can also use it for any of our in-person trainings that are coming up. Sadly, they're only in the US. The video training, of course, is available everywhere. But our series of public classes that's coming up on the throughout the US, that discount code will also be good for 10% off of the in-person course.
All right. Thanks, Rob. And you can find the links to this course by visiting the show notes on MyExcelOnline.com/podcast. Awesome stuff. Thanks, Rob. Now let's just finish up by going on to your Excel favorites. I'm sure you have a keyboard in front of you. What's your favorite keyboard shortcut?
So, okay, the stories about people who are taught Excel by like not even giving them a mouse, right? Like you just have to use the keyboard for everything. I'm not one of those guys that's pried the F1 key off of his keyboard.
The modelers.
Yeah, I'm I think that like a truly hardcore Excel modeler would watch me work, at least with regular Excel, and be going like, wow, this guy, he's kind of amateur, isn't he? Look, he doesn't know all those keyboard shortcuts. Like, for example, I have not learned to use the keyboard to navigate between worksheet tabs. The page down, page up stuff.
Neither
I don't even remember.
Yeah, neither have I.
Is it Alt? Is it Alt page up or is it Control? I
well, it's so awkward that my fingers can't get to it, and that's why I don't use it. It's not like
Yeah. Well, I just had this mental block. Like Alt Tab is meant to show me the thing I was just looking at, right? So like I just changed workbook sheets, worksheets. Yeah, I feel like Alt Tab should take me back, right? Like computer, just know what I was looking at. Right?
Yeah.
Definitely the Control arrow keys. Those are indispensable. Yeah. Control arrow down, Control arrow left, and then the Control Shift. Like really, that's the stuff that I wear out.
All right. Cheers, buddy. Thanks for that. Now, I know the answer to the next question, but I'm still going to ask it. What is your favorite Excel tip?
Yeah, that's a setup, isn't it? My favorite Excel tip is to understand that you probably already have a version of Excel that has Power Pivot in it. You just need to go turn it on. So you go into COM add-ins and you turn on Power Pivot. That's the number one checkbox.
Nice. And if you don't have a version that supports it, you can always download the Power BI desktop and use that to work with Power Pivot because that's free.
Yes, it is. Yep, totally is.
So that's another good Excel tip. All right. Now, what's your favorite function and why?
My favorite function is the calculate function, which appears in Power Pivot. It's only in Power Pivot.
Yep.
It is the do anything I want magic function. There was an old joke when I used to work on the Excel team, and this joke has aged out because, anyway, so I used to say, hey, folks, we've got average if and sum if, and then we had the sum if s, some ifs and average ifs, right? So we have sum and count and average. Yep. There's no max. There's no max if, no min if. What the heck, guys? Did we just get bored? The reason this joke is dying is because Excel 2016 has now introduced exactly those functions, min and max ifs. And the calculate function is the anything if. Okay? You want year over year percent change if? Yep, that's calculate. You want standard deviation if? Yep, that's calculate. You want percent contribution of margin to blah, blah, blah if? Yep, that's calculate. And it's easy to do. It sounds like, ooh, that's scary. No, you take any formula you've ever written in Power Pivot, okay? And then you can get the if version of it, like the filtered version of it. And it also lets you do all kinds of other crazy things. Like it's not even if, it's also like you can take any formula you've ever written and get the year-to-date running total version of it with just a flick of the wrist. It's crazy. Yeah. It seems like cheating. And I always tell people when we teach calculate in the class, like we're about to teach you your new favorite Excel function. Another really cool thing about Power Pivot formulas is that you don't really have to understand how they work. Like if someone gives you an Excel formula and you don't understand how it works, the moment you have to modify it, and you always have to modify it for your needs, now the fact that you don't understand how it works means you can't really follow the pattern. But in Power Pivot, the formulas, you just write them once. And every modified version of them is just manipulating the pivot table field list. You do anything you want with it. You never need to change the formula. So if someone gives you a formula that works, even if you don't understand how it works, you never need to modify it. It's sort of like counterintuitive that you can cheat and you can follow and you can steal and you can copy other people's patterns in Power Pivot. That you really can't do that in regular Excel, at least not nearly as effectively.
Man, it sounds powerful. So all you guys out there, go for it. Calculate is the formula to use within Power Pivot. Now, there are a lot of Excel add-ins, and what's one that you always use?
Well, I won't cheat and say Power Pivot. It did start as an add-in, built by Microsoft, but it's much more baked in. It's more native now. I'm going to say Power Update is my indispensable add-in because there's nothing like auto refresh where you don't even have to be like in the office. Like the latest version of your dashboards and reports get produced. The latest data gets pulled into them and then they get distributed to the right people hands-free without you having to be there to turn that crank. Yeah, so Power Update is definitely my favorite add-in.
I'll put a link in the show notes for people to access that. Okay, apart from your blog, what's a great online resource for learning Excel that you've found throughout your time?
Let's see here. So like I've learned a lot, certainly like from the Mr. Excel forums over the years. Like anybody else, like actually, Google is really the go-to, right, for basically everything. Most people actually find our site through Google as opposed to from word of mouth. For me, like I'm now like almost a little bit snobbish, like, unless someone's working with these new tools, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for me to be reading and learning from them. But Ken Pauls, the MVP out of Canada, like I actually originally wrote the first book for him. He was the one that pushed me over the edge to write the first book.
That was your love letter to him.
It was my love letter to Ken Pauls, and it eventually took. And like he's really Power Pivot and also Power Query. He got so into those things that he quit his job. He's now like a full-time, Power Pivot and Power Query professional. Like he's one of my, my favorite conversion stories, right? Like I infected him, and now we're back to where we used to be, which is that Ken does things that I look at and go, wow, I don't know how the hell you did that. That's amazing. Ken's website, excelguru.ca, definitely a good one.
He's a super smart guy, Ken.
What a great dude. I've really been improved by knowing him.
All right. Now, if you could recommend one Excel book to our listeners, what would it be?
I didn't anticipate this question.
Okay.
The best Excel book to read might not even be an Excel book. I would read something like, if you haven't read it before, I'd read something like the book Moneyball. Even if you're not into baseball, which I am not a baseball fan at all, I found that book fascinating. And it shows what, a handful of, sort of like spreadsheet heads can do to an industry that's not conditioned to use data. And by the way, like, it's not just about baseball. Like, basically, like, these folks in the book Moneyball, they use, spreadsheets and math and statistics and stuff. And I'm not a statistics buff at all. I'm not a stats guy. But they use these kinds of techniques to just completely take unfair advantage over the entire world of baseball. Like, they're just, for a while there, for a few years, like, they're a grown up playing against children. So the beautiful thing is that there's nothing at all that makes baseball special in that regard. The entire business world is like that.
Yeah.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
Everyone's always talking about, hey, what's the next big thing in data? Is it data science? Is it big data? Is it Hadoop? No. Like, we work with hundreds of companies every year, and the number one thing that's the next big thing in data is doing sort of like what we would think of as the basics and doing them well. There are Moneyball-sized opportunities everywhere. Every single person listening to this is working for or with companies that absolutely can be revolutionized and on short time frames by truly applying data and applying these data tools effectively for the first time.
They have to just get out of their comfort zone and learn these tools, and they're going to find out some great insights about the company. And can you see that one day, the headline, Power Pivot wins the World Series?
That would be awesome. I'd pay a lot to see that. But I think the book Moneyball, it's a page turner. It's exciting. It's an exciting book if you haven't read it. It is fun to read. It's well written, and it almost reads like a novel, except that it's true. The whole thing's true. Yeah. A novel about data, but it's true. And it's just so great.
Thanks, Rob. All right, you can find the links to this book and everything we've been chatting about today, including tutorials on Rob's favorite shortcuts and tips, by visiting MyExcelOnline.com/podcast. I have a final scenario here for you, Rob. Okay, let's say that I'm an Excel beginner or intermediate user, and I need to learn the most important features of Excel within a week because I have a job interview coming up. With all the Excel knowledge that you know today and all the online and offline resources available, what will be the quickest way for me to start learning Excel and preparing for this job interview?
Wow. I have found that, especially with a job interview, the unfortunate thing is the person interviewing you probably doesn't know the difference, right, between someone who's good at Excel and someone who's not.
That's right. That's
fortunate and unfortunate, right? If you happen to be, being interviewed by someone who is good at Excel, the number one way to impress someone today would be to say that you know how to write macros, or even better, in some ways, scarier, is to say that you know how to do array formulas. Like, those are sort of the apex predators of the quote unquote traditional Excel world. Like, I don't know that going into a job interview and saying that you know Power Pivot, sadly, I don't think it's going to help you that much yet, because the awareness isn't there. If you know about it, if the interviewer doesn't, you're not really going to get any credit for that. If you could show them examples of the work that you can do with Power Pivot, that's different. Like, of course, that requires that you have access to their data ahead of time, which, doesn't really happen in an interview. The Excel interview is a tough one, right? If you always know your audience, like in like even in a presentation situation, like knowing who your audience is, if you can find out some things about your interviewer before the interview, that might make a huge difference. Like if they're a Wall Street, financial type, going in there and talking about macros and array formulas is probably going to be your most, wow factor. That'll get their attention. If they're not like that, if they're like not an Excel person, being really good at charts, to make pretty charts, knowing how to make things pretty will be your best skill set. And not knowing who the interviewer ahead of time is a big disadvantage. So if you think it might be one or the other, like sort of an Excel novice that's interviewing you, or like a high-end modeler, I would invest in those two directions. Be able to say that with a straight face that you can write macros and array formulas, and also by the way, here's something that I made in Excel. I can make things look this good.
Yeah, you're right, because there's always a lot of management reports that you do every month. So if you can show that charts and make it pretty, I'm sure that you will have an advantage compared to the next person coming in there. All right, Rob, that's a great answer, buddy. Finally, what's the best way for our listeners to connect with you?
Well, we hang out at our website, read our articles, powerpivotpro.com, leave comments. We're pretty active in responding to comments. We're also Power Pivot Pro on Twitter. We're pretty responsive there as well. So those are, sort of the two primary ways. We also have a Facebook page and YouTube. We're in the process of revamping those. So I would focus on our website and on our Twitter.
All right, Rob. Thanks, buddy. Thanks for your time today. It's been an eye-opener with Power Pivot. And, a lot of our listeners as well have just seen the power that's within Power Pivot. And, you've gave us a lot of insight. Mate, you are a genius in that field. And thank you for your time.
Oh, on the contrary, thank you for having me on. This is an honor. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks, Rob. And hopefully I can get you on again down the track when you have your new book coming up. Are you planning to release a book?
I have another book idea in mind. It's too early for me to disclose it.
Another love letter.
Another love letter. This one would be, the teaser I'll give is, this one would be very non-technical. It'd be about data, but not technical, not about the formulas and stuff.
Maybe fictional.
Oh, maybe a love letter novel, a data love letter mystery.
Two data nerds.
Yes, from data with love.
Yeah. Good stuff. I'm looking forward to that, Rob. Thanks once again, buddy, and speak to you soon.
Thank you very much, John. Much appreciated.
Hey, guys, I hope you enjoyed this podcast show. Thank you for listening. Now, I need your help. I need you to please leave an honest review for the My Excel Online podcast on iTunes. Now, ratings and reviews are extremely helpful and greatly appreciated, and I read each and every one of them. So if you go onto iTunes and search for the My Excel Online podcast, you can leave a review and also subscribe so you can receive all the new episodes as soon as they come out. Also, if you go over to my blog at MyExcelOnline.com/blog, you can subscribe to receive weekly Excel lessons for free. Now, these are going to be delivered to your inbox each and every Friday, containing a lesson on formulas, pivot tables, charts, and analysis. By signing up, you also get a copy of my free Excel ebook called the Ultimate Excel Resource Guide. Now, in this ebook, I show you and review the best Excel blogs, the best Excel YouTube channels, the must-have Excel forums for you to succeed. I handpick and review the best Excel online courses. I show you the various Excel books that are available, and I also explain the different time-saving add-ins that you must have in order to get the full potential out of Excel. Plus, I have much more information. Now, this ebook is jam-packed full of value, and it's free if you sign up to my weekly Excel lessons. So go over onto my Excel blog and subscribe to receive your free ebook and also get your awesome weekly lessons. All right, until the next episode, keep excelling.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the My Excel Online podcast. Be sure to subscribe and share this with your colleagues so they can reach their full Excel potential. You can also visit MyExcelOnline.com/podcast for show notes, as well as John's online Excel courses and free tutorials to help you stand out from the crowd. Until next time, keep excelling.